Hi everyone, it's Rich from Move Me On here. I'm really happy today to be joined by Jonny, and we're going to talk about joining a rapidly scaling business and going through the IPO process, which Jonny has recently done. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of MoveMeOn.com. We run a global platform for consultants and former consultants to discover opportunities and find some career inspiration and guidance, and that's what today's all about. So Jonny, I'll hand over to you, and it'd be great to hear a bit more about you and what you're up to at Deliveroo.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Jonny. I work at Deliveroo. Deliveroo is a delivery platform. I think anyone in the UK or Europe, Australia will probably know it quite well, maybe less so in the US, but very similar to like an Uber Eats or a DoorDash type business. So we work with restaurants delivering food from the restaurants to customers' houses. I started my career in consulting. I was at Bain in London. I was there for a few years. I then, after about 3 years, decided to go in-house. Went to a company called Nando's, for a restaurant chain. Again, if you're in the UK, you'll be very familiar with it. In other markets, maybe less so. Worked there in sort of a strategy role, and then a little bit in operations as well. And then after about 3 years there, saw the world of delivery kind of taking off in that restaurant space, and decided to jump ship as such to Deliveroo. They were sort of one of the bigger players in the UK. And I knew a few people working there, and they all spoke very highly of the business. Started off in a role called, in a team called the Finance and Strategy team, and did that for about 1.5 years. And then we launched a new business within Deliveroo called Deliveroo Hop, which is essentially, so Deliveroo not only delivers restaurant food, but also delivers groceries. And we then decided, as a sort of an additional niche, we would own our own grocery stores, and we would deliver specifically from those grocery stores. And that meant we could do it sort of faster and with better inventory accuracy than if we were partnering with other grocery stores. We launched that coming up to 2 years ago. We literally started it sort of from the ground, just a few of us in a room with some laptops. We've now got sort of sites across, I think, 5 countries. Going really well, rapidly growing. And we started off, everyone was doing everything, very much like a startup. And I've now sort of put myself in the operations team. So I work on making sure the sites run well and effectively, improving processes, looking after labor and waste, and just making sure that the customers have generally great experiences.
Cool. Loads to go into there. So I think I want to pick up on, you joined a kind of rapidly scaling company that was maybe maturing at the time. So I guess before we get into Deliveroo Hop, which is almost a startup within a startup-y environment, so how big was Deliveroo when you joined, roughly, in terms of like number of people, and where is it today? And obviously you've gone through an IPO, so just be good to hear more about that kind of journey.
Yeah, I'm probably going to get these figures completely wrong, but it was, I think, around 1,000 people when I joined. So I joined beginning of 2020. Super weird time to join because it was just before lockdown started. And I think we had about 1,000 people, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 at least. It was very interesting period because COVID sort of happened soon after I joined, and everyone sort of went and started working remotely. And given I didn't know most of my colleagues, by that point I'd only been there a few weeks, it was a very odd experience. But all the restaurants closed down. If you remember, everyone closed down, and so we were suddenly like, oh my god, we've got no revenue because there's no restaurants on. And then suddenly all the restaurants opened up, but for delivery only. Suddenly the business went absolutely bananas, and we just had like incredible sort of, in terms of the business, it was sort of like incredible growth in 2020 and 2021 as well, which was just sort of not at all obviously what I would have expected when I sort of joined. I mean, I knew it was growing fast, but it sort of grew at incredible pace. I think now we're at about 4,000 people. So we've probably kind of gone 3 times in size since I've joined. That part I don't really notice that well. Like the office was full of people when I joined, and it's still full of people, and we've got global offices and stuff. So and we've gone remote. So I don't really see that so much. The thing that I've noticed that's really different is how much more mature the business has become. I would say when I joined, it was very much like, I think startups go through several phases, and I think it had gone through the startup phase because, you know, it's over 1,000 people. I was probably at sort of like, I don't know if this is the right term. This definitely isn't the right terminology, but like the awkward teenage stage where it's like, we're big enough that we should have all these like processes and everything, and we've got loads of people, and we need to like build this all out. But it was still sort of trying to work as a startup as well, and had people there from the beginning who just like, you know, just got stuff done. So I think we were sort of at that stage when I joined, and it's just become so much more mature over the 3 years that I've been here. And I would say we're sort of like now, you know, in our mid-20s, you know, probably something like that, you know, sort of fighting fit business. So yeah, that's been really interesting to go through. And I think part of that is we had an IPO. So we IPO'd, oh God, I'm going to get the date wrong now. I think about 2 years ago. Yeah, about 2 years ago, I think we IPO'd. Probably someone's looking at a calendar going, you got that really wrong. But we IPO, and I think because of that, we had to kind of get everything sort of straight and in order. And I think that was probably a catalyst to making sure we sort of matured as a business. And now, like, yeah, are we as well run as sort of like a FTSE 100 company that's been around for 50 plus years? Like, absolutely not. There's still lots more to do. But in terms of how we run a business, it's just like so much more slick than it was, 3 years ago when I joined.
And is it kind of feeling different? And I guess are there pros and cons around that? You sort of started in that, you know, early teenage phase, and presumably were attracted to that kind of like slight sense of chaos and high growth. I mean, possibly the way you've kept that going is by moving to Deliveroo Hop.
Yeah. So I kind of feel, because I moved to Deliveroo Hop, which was like a startup within Deliveroo, I kind of felt like that chaos has, I guess, continued a bit for me, but the wider business has got kind of a bit more controlled. I think there are pros and cons, definitely. So there's much more pros as in, I think the pros outweigh the cons. So as so much as you like things just work more efficiently, you know, whether that just be like something super basic, like how do you expense receipts? You know, how do you do your expenses? You know, like that process just works. Or like, how do we hire people? Which is super important. But like, you know, like actually, do we have like a really good way of calibrating hires now? And you know, how do promotions work? So I think all of that is like massive benefit. I think the potential downside of it is you become less like innovative as a business. I think, you know, when you're very much a startup, you can just kind of like do something. You know, you can just kind of get a few people together and say, okay, we're going to focus on this for a few months and launch something. I think now it's harder to do that. However, I think the businesses try to maintain some of that sort of, I guess, startup founder mentality, and particularly so within, you know, Deliveroo Hop. They very much like, you know, gave it a budget. They sort of said, yes, you can have, you know, this will be the headcount for it, which then allowed us to sort of grow. They held us to a very, very high bar, which I think made it quite, you know, which made it quite full on, probably quite rightly. But I think when growing, you can lose that sort of startup mentality. We seem to have maintained it so far. I guess it will come increasingly harder the more we sort of grow and the more we mature.
Yeah. Something I wanted to dig into, Jonny, you've kind of made that transition from consulting into kind of like in-house strategy type stuff, and now you're in a sort of pure operations role. And it, you know, that's I think a theme that a lot of the audience sort of want to pursue, that moving away from strategy into kind of real responsibility, right, or P&L or operations. What are your tips around kind of making that happen looking back? You know, what do you think you've kind of done to do that?
Yeah, so I think a few things. I think one is just knowing what it is you want to do, what you like doing. I didn't sort of like end up here sort of by accident as such. Like did I know there was going to be a team called Deliveroo Hop? Like, absolutely not. Like, no one did like 2-3 years ago. But in terms of like I wanted to have, responsibility. I wanted to do I wanted to be doing rather than advising. I wanted to be leading a team. All of that was very much like part of my goals, and I was sort of working towards those. I would say sort of like advice is, so once you kind of know where you want to go, then kind of look at other people who have done similar paths and say, okay, how can I sort of navigate kind of a similar-ish path? What I personally did was I think it's quite hard to go from consulting to like a role I'm in now. And that would be like any function, like, I'm in operations now, but it could be, you could say the same thing for marketing or, supply chain or whatever. I think you probably, because you don't know anything about that function, it's quite hard to, I think, make that move. I think what kind of worked for me was moving to like in-house sort of strategy, or the team at Deliveroo I was in called finance and strategy, which very much like leveraged my prior consulting skill set, but like within a company. And then once people knew me in that business and were able to sort of trust me, then when they started up this new thing, Deliveroo Hop, it was actually the person that I'd been working with super closely. He was sort of like my business partner, SVP, like, so very senior. And when he moved over, he was like, oh, Jonny, would you be interested in coming over to this new team? And that only happened because I'd worked with him and he knew me and he kind of trusted me to do a good job. And he was happy to take the gamble that I didn't really know what I was doing that much in operations, but that was kind of like, okay, because he was like, we'd worked together and he kind of trusted me. I think there's no way he would have trusted someone he didn't know who hadn't done that type of job before. So I kind of think I had to do it in steps. Like, one step was moving into the company in something I was very familiar with. And then the next thing was moving within the same company to something I was unfamiliar with.
Yeah, it's a bit like a game of chess. I kind of use that. You can't really get to checkmate straight away, and you have to be quite intentional. And I love your gambling.
Yes.
People are willing to take one gamble at one time and rarely will take two. So if it's, new company, new job type, that's a double gamble, right? But actually you were, trusted deliverer, knew this person, staying in the same company. The one gamble was, moving you from strategic stuff to operational stuff. And
Exactly.
Really important message, I guess, is those moves are therefore easier within the company that you're already in. And then let's say you wanted to become a COO, then that might necessitate a move out of, current company, but at least you're coming from a kind of senior operations CV or resume at that point.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally agree.
I'm interested then. So digging into skill set, obviously you kind of built your skill set out of consulting and then internal strategy. Like, if you think about your job now, running an operations team, it might be helpful to know a little bit more about scale of team and that sort of thing. Like, what are the, I guess, basic consulting skills that you still use all the time, and what do you maybe use less of?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that pure consulting skill of like strategic thinking and problem solving, and just being able to do that like at pace, is just such an important skill that you learn. Like, you learn it right at the beginning of your career in consulting, in your first couple of years. And it just kind of carries you throughout. And I see it sort of even with people who are like super senior and they've kind of got that consulting background. And I think, there are constantly like problems or challenges or things that you need to solve for. And being able to quite quickly, like, kind of, you've got all your mental models in your head that you've learned from consulting, and quite quickly going, okay, I see what, trying to diagnose what the problem is, asking the right questions, diagnosing what the problem is, and then going, okay, and then how do we go about solving that? Okay, then putting together a plan and executing on it. And if you can just do that at pace, I think that kind of holds you in really great stead. And it doesn't really matter what the problem is, what the function is, what the industry is, but just having that skill set, I think, is really strong. I think sort of concise communication, I think, is good as well. Being able to kind of communicate with peers, like across the business, I think is really important. I think something you learn in consulting, like your partner has, when you're in consulting, your partner has absolutely no time for you to like ramble on. When they come past your desk and go, hey, hey, Rich, what's the answer to this? You need to tell them in like 1 minute, like, because then they're walking off to another meeting. And being able to do that, I think, is a really good skill set. I say that whilst I'm probably just rambling on to you, by the way, and not talking precisely at all.
We'll edit you, Jonny. We'll make it concise.
And then I think sort of those sort of skills that you just learn early on in your career as well, around like storytelling, whether that be like in a slide deck or a document or just an email and presenting in a meeting. I think that storytelling and the ability to Excel model, just those hard skills work really well. Like I don't build too many models anymore, but like I definitely check people's models and think being able to do that's really important. Or even just like in a meeting, just grabbing the keyboard on a model and just kind of showing the team, you've still got it with the, your Excel shortcuts always sort of help somewhat. It makes them think you've earned their trust or something.
And I guess almost kind of the opposite question, like, people coming from a consulting background, or maybe they've moved into in-house strategy, but they've not made the leap into a senior operational P&L role. Like, what's kind of shocked you about that move? What have you really learned? What are the skills that maybe you kind of didn't have? I guess how are you different now to when you were in those more strategic roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a lot about working with people, which is, so I want to say this in the right way. Like in consulting, you definitely have to develop like good EQ skills, good client management skills, like absolutely. But in a way, it's sort of quite a formal relationship. And you always have like your team. I mean, I left consulting after 3 years, so I was sort of relatively junior still. You always had your manager or your partner that you could escalate things to if things went wrong. Whereas you have that less when you're in-house. And I think learning how to build up those relationships, I think is like really important. It sounds obvious. It sounds like, oh, that's simple, just like be nice to people. But it's really like understanding where people are coming from. And I see a lot of ex-consultants struggle with this. They focus so much on being right rather than doing things in a different way, which would be more effective. And I think you have to like invest the time up front, like getting to know people, making relationships. If you're going to do something that impacts someone's work, like you can't just do it. You've got to go and you got to give them a heads up. You got to know what their goals are, understand what they're afraid of. Like if I give you an example, one piece of work I did, I was trying to push something through, and it was the right thing to do. It was like definitely the right thing to do. And the person that was basically having to implement it was like pushing back. And I kept coming, every time he pushed back, I came back to him with logic. No, this is why we have to do this. This is the right thing to do. And it took me a bit of time to really notice this. But their mindset was, there's a 90% chance. He kind of was like, yeah, I know you're right. But sorry, he didn't say it like that. That sounds really, whatever. He said, I understand the logic of why we would do this. But and he didn't actually say this out loud, but this is kind of what I inferred. It's like, there's a 90% chance this works and is good for the business. Not necessarily good for him, like okay for him, but good for the business. And there's a 10% chance this doesn't work. And then worst case scenario, that looks terrible on him, he gets fired. So it's like, for him, there was actually minimal upside. It was something he wasn't very comfortable with. There was minimal upside for him and huge downside for him. And I just didn't understand that. I was coming back what's the right thing to do here for the business? Anyway, that was a huge learning for me. It took me a while to sort of reflect on that and really realize that that's what happened. And there was no one really telling me that that's what happened. It was just something I kind of learned later on. But I see that as a common mistake that consultants make when we're coming out.
And something I quite often hear is the need to ask questions, and consultants, even that culture tends to be one of needing to communicate the answer, right? And it sounds like you've learned to sort of really build empathy, ask questions, develop relationships. Feels like things are probably going slower, but you're developing that understanding, that buying, and like you said, different points of view. I wonder also, do you just naturally manage a wider range of people, right? When you're in consulting, everybody's a bit the same. You know, and imagine when you're running, you know, operations teams in what is effectively a supermarket delivery business, there's just a wider range of backgrounds, personality types. Is that the case?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Actually, to go back to your previous point about saying it takes longer, it takes longer in the short run up front, but actually it's quicker in the long run. So it kind of feels like, oh, this is slow and painful, but actually you're much effective and faster in the long run. So it is sort of a good investment, if you look at it that way. Yeah, in terms of working with different people, yeah, absolutely. You know, if I think about the people I work with now, I've got one ex-consultant I work with. Other people have operations backgrounds, HR backgrounds, marketing backgrounds, like data scientist, which is probably similar-ish to consulting actually. But yeah, so you work with a bigger range of people. I think particularly when like managing people, managing consultants is actually quite easy to do because they're like usually type A, like really smart, got loads of determination, want to do well, work really hard. And that's actually quite easy to manage that kind of person. And I think then you have when you're managing bigger teams, not even managing, but just working with as, you know, as peers, or you're managing a project where these people are involved, where other people are involved. And everyone has completely different sort of, because completely different backgrounds, completely different motivations. And yeah, that sometimes takes, I think, consultants a bit of time to sort of get over or understand. But it's like, yeah, super important.
Awesome. I have a closing, I guess, question for you, Jonny. I appreciate all the time. I think so many great insights. If you think about your role now, kind of senior operations guy in a, you know, high growth environment, who does it really suit? And I think you said something earlier, which is that you kind of really tuned in and spent time working out like what made you tick. So who does it really suit, and who, you know, should actually go, oh gosh, that's maybe something I thought I should do or might want to do, but it's not for me?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to be specific on like operations here. I'd say like if I be a bit wider and be like, you know, working in you know, working for a tech business, I would say, and then I'll go more specific on operations. I think working at sort of in tech, in a fast growing sort of company, I think the people that have done really well and seem to get most out of it are typically like people that can, you know, generally smart people who take accountability and like run with things. Like someone that you can just throw a problem at and they get excited about that and they just work out how to solve it. They go, okay, I'm going to go away. They speak to the right people. They analyze the right data, you know, or work with an analyst team and go, okay, I've diagnosed what the issue is here, you know, and then they go, and this is my plan to solve it. And then they go and solve it. And they just kind of keep everyone updated, and they absolutely just take accountability, run with it, and do a great job. And you can see their faces like light up as they're kind of like giving these problems to solve. And these are things that are like headaches for everyone else, and just go and do it. And those are the kind of people that typically just do well in the tech business. I think that is probably like across all functions at Deliveroo. I would say that's true. Like whether you're in marketing, HR, operations, wherever. I think those kind of people are the people that typically do well and sort of stand out.
And not too much permission, not feeling like you're not the person who can go and just do it, get it done. Yeah, bringing people along with you, maybe, but, you know, feeling like you can just crack on and get it delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. And take ownership for it, I think, is the big one. So it's saying like, you know, when you come up to, I think this is the key thing. When there's a blocker, there's like some people that will say, there's a blocker, I can't do it. Like, or we can't do this anymore. And then there's another kind of person that says, everyone, there's a blocker. There are 3 ways we could go about this. These are the pros and cons of all those 3 ways. I recommend this way. Do you agree? You know, and that kind of person is the person that's like gonna lead, you know, gonna do really, really well, and takes ownership for it. Goes, yeah, it's a problem, but it's my problem. I'm gonna solve it.
It doesn't need to be a problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a what would you call it? It's an obstacle, maybe, something like that.
And I guess a bit more specifically about, let's say, operations. So what are the characteristics of the operations kind of leadership role, and therefore, you know, who does it suit?
Yeah, that's a bit more sort of, I guess, nuanced. So I think, so by the way, I was never like, so just to give context, I'm not like, hey, I'm now like I'm in an operations role at the moment. I'm really enjoying it. In 3 to 5 years time, will I still be in an operations role? No idea. I enjoy doing lots of different things. So I wouldn't go and say, hey, I've done strategy and now I'm like operations. That's my thing. But I think operations really suits people that love rolling their sleeves up, getting stuff done. I think that's just huge. And I think that's very different from consulting. Consulting is very much like you're advising a lot more than I think, you know, in operations, you're just like getting stuff done. I think that's huge. I think it's being able to be like high level whilst on top of the detail at the same time. So it's like, I know I've got a vision of I want to get to there, you know, and how am I going to get there? So, you know, we've got a vision to be like, you know, the best quick commerce player globally, you know, that's not actually our vision. I'm just saying as an example. How do we get there? You know, these are, okay, what would define that? If it would be, if we hit these metrics and we hit this on the P&L, you know, these are the kind of things that we want to be doing. And then it's like knowing how to pull those, what levers you have to pull in order to hit those metrics, and then like going right into the detail, because there's like small things that make a huge difference. Like, okay, just to give an example, the people in our stores use these like zebra scanners to like scan stuff. Yeah. We like, when you scan something, there was then like a next button you had to press. Yeah. And then you scan something else. We got rid of, we worked out that if you got rid of the next button, it saved like, you know, a fraction of a second per item. But you build out to millions of items and you realize you were making a huge savings. So having like that level of obsession with the detail and being able to like kind of really deep dive into stuff, and having that sort of curiosity and fascination with that kind of thing, I think is super important. And then the last thing,
assuming everything's right and can't be made better, you know,
absolutely,
always getting into the detail and finding little bits and pieces that actually could be better.
Yeah, I actually become my most anxious when everything's green on the scorecard. It sounds really counterintuitive, but like I go, but there's something coming. There's something that we don't know about, something I have to pick apart, and I start getting really obsessive into like, okay, what's going on here? What's going on here? What's the storm that's going to rise? Yeah, and really sort of being, you know, wanting to get into that detail. And then I think the last thing, and I probably should have said this is the first thing, because it's probably the most important thing, is building up a great culture and having people that, and also recruiting people that will contribute to that culture as well. You know, operations work is full on, it's intense. Nothing's actually like super complicated, but it's about doing stuff well, like all the time and consistently, and motivating people to do that. So developing like the right culture, the right incentives, having the right people in place is like the #1 input into that. We actually did some sort of like analysis, and we saw like, if you looked at the culture metrics, there was like a almost perfect correlation with like the operational metrics. And it's always hard to prove causality, but I'm like almost certain that you have the right culture, you will do a great job. You have a terrible culture, you will have a terrible job. I think that's probably the most important thing. So easy to overlook because you have these like operational metrics and scorecards which you're going after, but is probably the number one thing you have to focus on. Which is why I terribly mentioned it last.
Yeah, like team spirit, and I think it ties together nicely with your point around being that person who will get into the detail. And in my experience, that means actually getting into the trenches, doing, you know, the most basic job that you're asking your team to do, actually going and helping them out and really understanding where their pain points are. And, you know, I see teams developing a lot of respect for their leaders who are able to sort of come down and actually want to go and, you know, spend time picking and packing or whatever that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. We are, one of the things I'm looking at now is how to replenish our milk, because I was putting milk on the shelf and we have all this milk on the shelf already. You have to take it all out, put the new ones to the back, and then put this milk back on. And it was such a pain. I was like, you guys do this every day. So yeah,
Feed the
I would
milk.
have, and they didn't tell me that. They would, and why would they? It was like a small part that is accepted, that was it. So now we're like, I'm looking into like, how do we solve that? But you have to get down on the job and do it, yeah, to understand it.
Awesome. Great way to close. Jonny, appreciate your time. There's been loads of insight there around, you know, IPOs, scale ups, startups within startups, being a leader in operations, even if you're not there forever. So appreciate the time. And if people are interested in other topics, then check out some other videos. Head over to movemeon.com. There's loads of insights there, loads of operations roles on our platform. So Jonny, we'll catch up soon. And thanks again.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it.